Okay, let's talk about your natural limit, the cap on how much muscle you can build. But first, before I get into explaining any of that, we got to have a little shot. Cheers. All right, what is the actual natural limit of your genetic potential when it comes to muscle gain? The first thing I want to touch on, my experience training people. First, as an in-person personal trainer for several years, gained some exposure with my own teachings and methodology of what I think is going to work to build muscle. And I'm not the number one expert in this space, particularly at this time, because this was close to 10 years ago, probably. I noticed that pretty much the same things that I would apply to myself produced a similar result in my clients. And they would get expected results. There wasn't some weird scenario where I would, train myself in a certain way and see results based on my own genetics and all the other things I'm doing, and then apply the same things to my clients and get like a 180, a completely different result. There was a lot of consistency. And I think that points to the fact that for most of us, the same things are going to produce similar results. In that, like, one person who, trains with really high intensity and tries to push heavy weight sees muscle gain. Another person, they do the complete opposite. Let's say they don't train hard and they use really light weights. They don't even come close to failure. They see more muscle gain from that. We're not living in that world. Generally speaking, the same things have the same effect. Now, the magnitude or to what degree these different training protocols stimulate growth is going to vary from one individual to another. But there's a significant amount of overlap there based on my personal experience from what I've seen training myself and training other people. And what I realized is that although your genetics and your natural potential are factors, anybody I worked with who showed up to all their workouts and applied themselves and allowed me to push them hard enough for them to stimulate growth saw substantial improvement. And I don't think this is specific to me. I'm not doing this as a flex, being like, I'm the number one. It's like any trainer who's half decent could produce these results for clients. If you hold them accountable, teach them, the simple things of how to train smart, what to think about, what cues to use, understand your muscles some, how to push a set with high intensity while keeping the tension on the working muscle, use reasonable form, all these little simple things that help if you're brand new and you don't know. But I saw that people had, a similar response. And that led me to think, everybody, even if you have bad genetics, and I think I trained some people that had bad genetics, they were still seeing results if their goal was muscle gain. The magnitude of the results was maybe a little bit less. And I think for anybody out there who's watching this, what your takeaway should be is that, maybe your upper threshold is a little less than somebody else's, but you can get jacked and ripped. Everybody can, even if you don't have good genetics. And that's the goal for most of us, is to have a ripped muscular physique. If you have bad genetics and you want to be a professional bodybuilder, maybe it's just not going to happen. But if you're going to the gym, an everyday person, and you just want to look jacked, you can do it. And your genetics are not limiting you. My second point that I'm going to transition into is I got my arm gains tracker here. I don't know if you can see that or not, but basically I've been tracking my arm gains over the years. And this starts from 2020 onward, when I was only training arms through this period. But prior to that, from 2010 to 2015, I trained everything. And I built my arms up to like 16 and a half or 0.75 inches, in the 16-inch range, getting close to 17, but never got them to 17 inches. Training for 5 years, pretty consistently. I would say my training approach was like on point, but not like at a top tier level. Like I would still drink here and there, and I would miss workouts, once in a while, but I was like pretty consistent. I was in that like top echelon of like serious lifter, but not like obsessed, that top tier. I was kind of like one below it, let's say. And I was able to produce, 16 and a half, 16.3 quarters inches on my arms. And I think this would be the point where most people would determine that they're at their natural limit, because then, I got injured and stopped training and lost a lot of my gains. And then I started tracking again in September of 2020, and I'm at 15.75 inches. If you're interested in this, I made my arm training documentary on my channel where I literally documented everything I've done with my training, which is a very tedious process. So you should go watch it. I think there's a lot of good insight and lessons there. But for the sake of this video, I started back out at 15.75 inches and built up to 16.75 inches, and then was kind of stuck there. Managed to get like a year later, get up to 17 inches. And then for a year and a half or more, I hovered right around 17 inches. And I think there was some thoughts in my mind where I was like, I got to take steroids. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to continue to see progress. This is probably my natural limit. And then fast forward another couple years, another year and a half, I managed to get them up to 18 inches. And they're maybe 18 inches, a little over 18 inches now. And from that time then till now, a lot changed in my training and my approach. And it would have been a shame for me to decide that I've hit my natural limit, which I think a lot of you would in that same instance. Now, maybe you don't have the same arm measurements as me, or you don't have the exact same genetics and your situation is a little different. I think that a lot of people end up kind of 3/4 or halfway to their potential based on the current popular paradigm of training and what you should do. And you just stop. And then you're like, I'm at my natural limit now. I can't do anything more. And I'm going to blame my genetics for why I can't improve. And I'm not dismissing that your genetics aren't a thing, but I just think that if you look at your approach and go, could I be a little bit more dedicated? For me, I could. I would still miss a workout once in a while. I wasn't pushing my sets with as much intensity. I hadn't experimented with different tempos, with different amounts of volume. There's a lot of stuff I hadn't done yet. There was a lot of stones that still hadn't been turned over to see the underbelly, to see what's going on under there. And I think for most people, that's a similar type of situation they get into. And the last kind of part that I want to touch on is that it becomes really problematic as soon as you start blaming your genetics and your natural potential for why you can't do something. You're already limiting yourself. It doesn't mean you ignore that there is a cap, but if you're leaning on that as a crux to begin with, everybody that I've ever talked to that says those things, and then I examine their training, there's always something missing in their training that's actually limiting them. Oh, my genetics suck. I'm at my natural potential. This person, I need to take gear. This person has such elite genetics, or they're lying about it and they're taking steroids too. And always that person is not training super hard. I train them through a workout, or I have them as an online client, and I get them to send me videos of exercises they're doing, and there's their form is not great. They're not pushing their sets to failure. If you examine their history, they kind of jump from one program to another with a month off in between, and then you're blaming your genetics and saying that it's the natural limit that you're bumping up against, and your horrible genetics are the reason that you can't improve. Takeaway point is that that's only the case for the most minuscule, tiny top percentile of people. And if you want to take the other path of taking gear, go ahead. I'm not trying to persuade you away from it, but just know that you definitely have not unearthed all of your natural gains. But are you willing to do these more and more extreme things? Are you willing to, up your training frequency and train more often? Are you willing to push your sets harder, to the brink of insanity? Are you willing to experiment, change the tempos around, and do different things in your workouts every time? And if you're not, then you're not going to continue to see progress, and you're probably going to have to reach for something else or go in another direction. But for most people, what I'm saying is the process to continue to see progress, and where I kind of could have capped out at 16.75 or 17-inch arms, the additional benefit of investing in the process more and challenging myself to go, how can I get more consistent? How can I improve my diet a bit more? How can I crank the knob a little higher on all these little things? And then it allowed me to stumble into some additional techniques, like pushing with a faster tempo. Definitely allowed me to progress the weight more and subsequently lead to a bit more muscle gain. Doing drop sets with different tempos. using an extended rest time. These are all things that I've discovered probably in the last year to year and a half from just continuing to show up, just kind of stumbling into them. Just continue to show up and continue to try different things. You'll notice your body responds better to some things than others. And I think most of the things that my body responds better to, for the most part, you will as well, just based on my experience training other people. I've never seen like a completely opposite experience. I just think the magnitude, like let's say maybe I have a disposition to respond particularly well to fast explosive tempo, and somebody else may have less of a disposition. So they'll still see some benefit, but it may not be of the same magnitude, or it may not be as drastic. I think that's like a way to conceptually view how different things work for different people. I don't think you're going to have the complete opposite thing. I've never seen that, at least in my training experience. It's just different amounts of magnitude, and somebody else maybe sees a little bit more benefit using a slow tempo than I do. And again, we've been through this a million freaking times. Fast and slow tempos are good for different things. I think you should use both. But I just hope that you're not falling into the trap of blaming your bad genetics and deciding that the natural limit or natural potential is really low for you. And I think it's easy to do because you go on social media and you see people who have like freakish physiques. That's just the world we live in. You know, you're seeing the best of the best. You're seeing the very tippy top of the genetics. And then also like a lot of gear usage. And so you look at yourself and you're like, I look like a potato and my genetics suck. But I'm telling you, every person that I hear those words come out of their freaking mouth, they have a shitty training approach. Always. So look at yourself in the mirror. If you're thinking that your natural potential is what's holding you back, you know, is that really the thing that's holding you back? It's still a limit, but maybe there's a lot more that you could be doing. And it's not really your genetics that are holding you back from having a ripped aesthetic physique. Everybody could have one, man. Everybody could be lean enough to have a six-pack, and everybody could have a reasonable enough amount of muscle to look jacked and look good. It's possible for everybody, even the person with the worst genetics. If they do everything in their power to eat super clean, go to bed on time all the time, go to every single one of their sessions and push their absolute limits, train really freaking hard, and then progress their training and are willing to experiment with some different stuff to see how their body responds and just have some variety and stimulus and have a mindset of continuing to try to progress and evolve their training, that person, even that person who has the worst genetics, is still going to look decently jacked and be like, oh, and if you saw them, you're like, oh, that person works out. They got a solid physique. Look at that. They're in good shape. So I just think it's a moot point to focus on that. Like I could easily focus, and like I'm making social media content, I could easily focus on these people that have top tier genetics, just elite cream of the crop. That is not me. And I could just go, my genetics are holding me back. My natural potential is, I got to take steroids. I don't have elite genetics. Like it's a factor realistically, but just focusing on that, I could have done that when I was at 17 inches and then never been able to improve. But it turned out there was an extra inch of arm growth and extra muscle growth everywhere else. So it's just a mindset thing it doesn't help you at all. And yeah, push comes to shove, you get to a point where, you know, it's just like the reality is you want to gain another 30 pounds of muscle and you've already been training for a long time and you're like semi-peaked or you're close to your peak. You'd have to take gear for sure. But for most people that just want to be jacked and look good, then I don't think you should even consider doing that. I think you should just focus on your process, because there's a lot of risks and a lot of downsides to taking gear, and you're jacking up your hormones and shrinking your balls, and you never know what the side effects are going to be. And then you got to keep doing it to keep that progress, because your training is not good enough to begin with, because you're not actually tapping into your full potential. So you're going to use gear to compensate for your lack of training intensity or consistency or mental fortitude or whatever it is that you're lacking. So I think it's kind of a lose-lose. I think it makes a lot more sense if you've really elevated your training to its actual peak and then you're still not satisfied, and for whatever personal reason you want to go to the next level and hopping on gear. It's a personal choice. Make that decision, man. I'm not here to tell you what to do. But I think for most of us, freaking natural lifters out here, man, there's something in your approach that's lacking. You're just not dialed in enough with the simple stuff. It's really all it comes down to. I've never met a person, I've never yet to meet somebody who trains really hard, who goes to all their workouts, who lives a healthy lifestyle, and approaches their training with an open mind and progresses it over time, that isn't jacked. I have not met that person yet. They don't exist. They do not exist in my reality. I've worked at probably 8, 9, 10 different gyms, different countries. I worked as a trainer, in person, online. Go to the gym all the time. I'm friendly. I talk to people, get to know people that go to the gym. I've never met somebody, and this is over 14 years now. I've never met a person who does all the simple things and attacks their training and makes it a lifestyle that isn't jacked. There's different degrees of jacked, and your genetics and your bone structure are going to determine that. But I've never met somebody that I'd be like, wow, that person's really doing it all and doing everything, and they look horrible. Or they don't really look like they were lift, or they're not really that muscular. I haven't met that person yet. And every time I meet somebody who's like all on this natural limit, fucking genetic potential, everybody's on steroids or has elite genetics, I can't do anything. Every single time they got shitty training, they're doing something shitty. And they're just blaming their genetics. I'm telling you, man, that's what I'm seeing in real life. So don't go down that trap, man. It doesn't hurt to acknowledge what your genetics are, what your bone structure is, and to be realistic. And if you don't have great genetics, like you're not going to be David Lade or Chris Bumstead or the next Schwarzenegger. So you have realistic expectations. But if you're for most people, you're just training, you want to get jacked, you want to look good in a t-shirt, you want to attract some ladies or some dudes or whatever you're into. You just want to look built. It's possible for everyone. And I think you should only really consider the genetic limit natural potential thing if you're super freaking committed and then your aspirations and goals are huge to be a professional bodybuilder or to be like one of the top tier, most aesthetic people in the world. Then for sure, it's like your genetics, your natural limit is of high concern. But outside of that, it's just a stupid excuse that the average gym goer can reach for because you want to make an excuse and you want to make yourself feel okay for your lack of progress. You don't want to look at what you're actually not doing. And so you just have this crux that somebody who has, more muscle gain or more success in the gym than you, that to just point at some stupid reason to make yourself feel better. So you got to ask yourself, do you want to feel better or do you want to build muscle? Because if you're willing to just feel worse and look at what you're not doing and admit that you're just not training hard enough or you're not going to all your sessions or you just float around on your phone and then complain about why your body looks like a potato and you don't actually dig in and attack with some vengeance, bring a little freaking gusto to your sets. I don't know. I'm just rambling about what I see over my freaking years of experience. And I'm no expert. I just think there's a lot of like simple mental like slip ups that people fall into. So I hope that helps you to just ignore that freaking natural limit thing and just don't think about it. And when I was training like this, I wasn't like, oh, what's my natural? I was just like, there's got to be a way. And then I found a way, And I would acknowledge I have above average genetics. I have good genetics where I was able to get to, 16.75 inch arms, training hard, being consistent, but not being obsessive, not like going to like this ridiculous level. And I was still able to do that. And for a lot of people, that might be 15.5 inch arms instead. Everybody's level is going to be different. But regardless, even if you have worse genetics than me, and that level for you is 15.5 inch arms, you could probably still get to 16.5 or close to 17 if you're willing to reflect on your approach in the same way that I did. And if you really want it to just like convince yourself that it's possible and just believe that and then just keep pouring in and finding ways to do stuff. And I adopted a ton of additional practices and approaches and restructured my life to prioritize training more so that I have time to go to all my sessions no matter what. Push myself to the brink where I'm like super exhausted after and have to go home and take a nap. And you don't have to do that, but those are all things I could do to gain more muscle, to sacrifice other stuff to build more muscle. It's possible, to spend the time reflecting about my training and experiment with different training structures to see what's going to stimulate more growth instead of just being complacent and blaming my genetics. All those things you can do if you want to. So it's more a question of, for the majority of people, of what am I willing to do? Because a lot of it, when you get to that kind of upper level where you're like, my natural limit, it's not your natural limit. It's just, am I willing to do the additional things to stimulate more growth? That's the real conversation. That's the real question. You have to ask yourself, am I willing to potentially restructure my lifestyle so that I don't miss any sessions ever? Yes or no? Am I willing to like attack every workout with murderous intent to try to stimulate more growth and deal with the fatigue afterwards, the higher injury risk, the need for more mobility ahead of time? Am I willing to do that? Yes or no? You could decide, right? Am I willing to put my phone in my locker and time my rest times and focus solely on my workouts while I train instead of getting distracted all the time, texting and talking, bullshitting around? It's a choice. And are you willing to do that? That's what you should look at. If you feel like you're limited and you can't improve or you're getting close to your limit, I think you really need to ask yourself, am I willing to do more extreme things to lead to more growth? And then there is a point where you've done all the extreme things, or mostly, and that sliver of natural potential is getting smaller and smaller. But that's just territory that the majority of people are not in. So it's more a question of, are you willing to do more extreme things? Not, is my natural, genetic limit what's holding me back? Well, that helps you. Go there and make some gains. This arm training footage that you've been seeing here, if you want the exact specific workout that I'm doing, you can go to my Only Arms and subscribe there, or you can head over to my website where I'm going to be posting all my workouts in detail, exactly what I'm doing for each session, so you can follow and see and do my exact workouts.